Title of this session is Sea Level Rise, Oranges, and Mickey. It's reflective of what the consuls here in Miami, their priorities, and you'll learn more about that, what they do, what they focus on. Public diplomacy in 140 characters. And we have with us today Susan Harper. She is the Canadian Consul General. You can find the Canadian Consul at CANCG Miami. That's the English version. Of course, they have a Canadian version, which is at CG CAN Miami. Susan's personal Twitter handle is CG Miami Harper. Next, we have Dave Prodger, who's the British Consul General. And you can find the British Consulate at UK in Florida. And Dave at Dave Prodger FCO. Next, we have the Consul of Mexico, Jose Antonio Zavalgoitia. You can find the Mexican Consulate at Consul Mex, MIA. And you may find Jose Antonio at JA_ZABALGOITIA. Please follow them. Next, we have the Consul General of Spain, Cándido Kreis. You can find the consulate at Spain, MFA, and Cándido at MAECGOB. Or that's the Spanish version, right? That's the Spanish version of your Twitter handle. And then last but not least, we have Mina Kallenberg. Mina is the Deputy Consul General of the Netherlands. The Netherlands is at NL in Miami, and Mina is at WILLEMIJNKALLEN. And what we're going to do today is we're going to ask you to use for this session the hashtag of the entire conference, which is MW Miami, and also digital, DIPLO, short for diplomacy, SMW. So that's digital, DIPLO, SMW. And then we're going to try a little different, especially for the folks watching us on live stream. When we get through the beginning of this session and we open it up to questions and answers, you can choose to send us your questions through Twitter by using hashtag AskACG. So that's AskACG. So with that, let's get started. Every year, there's a theme that emerges that wasn't obvious to us when we started to put this conference together. And it gives us real insight into what's going on in the digital world. Last year, it was the involvement of governments in social media. We had the State Department submit a request to make a presentation and in fact joined us. We had Dave Prodger for the very first time and the Consul General from the Netherlands at that time. And then we also had some of our social influencers that joined us and then ran to the airport to get on an airplane because they were speaking at the UN. We were really surprised at that point to see how much governments were really using social media. Also, part of this, the title for this panel is Digital Diplomacy in 140 Characters. So with that, I want to ask a question of Susan, who's our consul for Canada, which is, what is digital diplomacy and why is your government on social media?
This is a little noisy, but this seems to be a very good mic, so please let me know if you can't hear at the back of the room. And it's interesting, the term digital diplomacy. We talked about public diplomacy, and I noticed that we were advertised as consular diplomacy. Digital diplomacy is certainly the term we use in Canada because it covers all the work that we do in the foreign ministries using social media. And digital diplomacy for us is based on two fundamental realities. First of all, as everyone recognizes, I think, social media is changing how everyone does business. And it changes what people's expectations are as well as what we have to deliver. And secondly, governments are quite aware of this, and given our role in society, we are always working to balance on one hand the impact of social media and the desire of our citizens to have the transparency that social media can give you. On the other hand, with the government's responsibility to analyze information from a variety of sources, to take decisions on complex issues, and then communicate the information and the decisions and the implementation to citizens and others. So there is a balance there between giving information quickly in 140 characters and some of the complexity of the work that we are doing. So in this context, digital diplomacy refers to the work that we do as consular officers or diplomatic officers for our government. And I would say that there are basically 5 principles that we see underlying the work that all of us do. And I'm sure my colleagues will talk to the specifics about how these vary for their different countries. But generally, first of all, we want to use social media to effectively inform, advocate with, or engage with our audiences. And the audiences can be our own citizens, they can be foreign governments, they can be elected officials, they can be NGOs, businesses, but we want to use social media for that end. Secondly, we talk about applying our goal of social media to all the responsibilities of a foreign ministry, and I'll go into a little bit of detail on that because I know that not everybody knows what we do for a living, so it's probably useful to go into that in a little bit of detail. But it's foreign policy, it's trade policy, it's international business development, international aid and development initiatives, consular services to our own citizens, and tourism, visa, and immigration services to foreign citizens. So all of that work, we find in one way or another we can use social media. Third, we're also very aware that the reality is that all our domestic departments have an international end to their business, and we as the international ministries have to have a very strong connection to our own domestic departments. And so what we are trying to do internationally is integrate effectively what we do with our own domestic government, because the issues are related and the audiences are going to be similar. This is the disadvantage of not having a table, but thank you. Fourth, we want to be clear that we understand that mobility is everything. My kids use phones constantly for everything. They use them instead of TVs, instead of monitors and desktops. Everything is about mobility now, and social media relates directly to that reality, that that's the tool that so many members of our audiences are using. So we need to keep evolving because people are on those mobile tools constantly. And finally, to be clear, we are public servants and we serve the government of the day as elected by our citizens. Governments change, and so do laws, and so do regulations and policies and practices. We have communications policies, all of us, that guide how we transmit that information, but over time, that information will change. So again, our goal with social media is to give timely information. What is the status now of the legislation or regulations or policies on certain issues? In Canada, for example, we've had a lot of change on our climate change issues, and so it was important to ensure that our own citizens and others were aware of our evolving policies, practices, and legislation. So I mentioned those 5 principles apply to all the different lines of business that we have in the Foreign Ministry, and let me just say what those are, and my colleagues will elaborate in their own presentations. First of all, consular, which is from passports to prison visits, voting while abroad, basically emergency management, basically providing services to our own citizens. Secondly, international business development, including foreign investment, trade, other economic partnerships, all of those areas. That's also a line of business where we use social media. Foreign and trade policy gets a little more complex. It's often hard to communicate those issues in 140 characters, so we use other social media, but we do our consultations and we do a lot of our work in social media in those policy areas as well. I think that international development assistance, because so many of our contacts and clients in other countries where we do development work are also using those social media. It's important to transmit that information. And finally, the tourism, visa, immigration information. People want a lot of that information, and we can provide it through social media. And these are the cases specifically that my colleagues are going to be addressing. So let me just conclude by citing two cases where Canada used social media through the Foreign Ministry. The first was on Syrian refugees. Canada used social media extensively at home to explain why we were taking in 25,000 Syrian refugees, how we were doing it, when we were doing it, and who we were targeting. This had a lot of attention from Canadians. It also had a lot of attention from other citizens and other governments. And so it was important to us to be communicating clearly and consistently and in a timely way what we were doing. So social media was a great set of tools to help us explain what we were doing with Syrian refugees. A second case is the electronic travel authorization. We just declared a new entry requirement for visa-exempt foreign nationals who fly to or transit through Canada. Well, that's the kind of information that all sorts of people could need to know, and we think there's nothing better than social media to get the word out to all those audiences who know that they will be going through Canada, so they get the information in the best way we can transmit it to them. So those are two examples of how we've used social media, and now I leave it to my colleagues to speak to their examples. Thank you.
And we can get details from Susan at the end of the conversation. But now, Dave, I have a question for you, and it involves a very famous hashtag. Can you guess what hashtag that is, everybody? He's from the UK. Brexit, that's right. So here's my question, Dave. The UK has recently voted to leave the European Union. This is a hugely significant decision which will affect not only the British population, but all of its partners in the European Union and beyond. How do you go about communicating the effects of such a momentous event, and what role does social media have in that process?
Thanks, Terry. Afternoon, everyone. Yes, the British vote at the EU, from the EU referendum to leave the EU as a seismic event. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. It's the first time we've had a question like that in 40 years. And it could well be a generation-defining moment for us. So many people in the commentariat thought that this was unexpected. I mean, if you were following the polls beforehand, you'd seen they're very, very tight, and the vote to leave was slightly ahead. So perhaps from that perspective it wasn't. But certainly what we had to do as government was to reassure our European partners and the rest of the world that Brexit did not mean that the UK was retiring from the world stage. So the way we did this was perhaps not through classic diplomacy, although we do that as well. We go out, we explain to our contacts how we do things, what's happening. But the first thing we did was look at how to get the message out. Now, politicians do that, and I would love to think that our politicians have the kind of social media following of some other icons like Taylor Swift or Katy Perry, but our Prime Minister, with the best will in the world, doesn't quite have the same draw. That said, our former Prime Minister, David Cameron, was the fourth most followed world leader. He was the largest followed in the EU, and so social media just on their own platforms has a huge following. But we know that this is how a huge amount of people are now getting their news. So instead of going through a classic campaign, and this is what it is, we automatically turn to social media. So we now have a hashtag Global Britain, which is what we are using to just underline all the reasons why the UK is not retreating from the world stage, why Brexit doesn't mean that the EU is in any way going to become less influential, but in actual fact it's an opportunity for us in the UK to reset the terms of the debate. So what I'll do, Terry, if you're okay, is I'll just give a couple of examples of what that means. Having said that social media was our first response, there are a lot of reasons for that, because of course you can adapt it into whichever form you want. So our initial concern was that the markets were looking surprised, the pound took a dive. It took about 10% off the value of the pound against the dollar. There are all sorts of dire predictions about our economy. So the first thing we had to do was reassure the world that actually our economy would remain the 5th biggest in the world. We would remain a key global player in all of the big economic clubs. And then actually we were well prepared to take those shocks. So under Global Britain, I'll just give you an idea of some of the little things we were doing. So, I mean, I just pulled up today just a few of the little hashtag quotes that would come out through our network. And I should say that the UK diplomatic network is in 168 countries. It's over 230 posts. So we've got a big global reach, but even that isn't really sufficient enough to be able to get this message out. So hence social media. So the tweets that were going out were things like, the UK is the 5th largest economy in the world and was the 2nd fastest growing economy in the G7 in 2015. Our digital exports are now worth over 30 billion a year, 0.5% of all service exports, hashtag Global Britain. But it's not just about the economy, it's also about the other areas where the UK will continue to play on the global stage. So security, so for example, this year the UK contributed £303 million to UN peacekeeping. So we're trying to illustrate that actually, because we're having a debate about our relationship with our European partners on one side, does not mean that we are not going to continue to be at the heart of European events as we go forward. Just because we're not in the EU doesn't mean we're going to be engaging on things like peacekeeping, security, prosperity, all the usual activity that we'd take on as a UK government. And then the final aspect was also just to underline for our European partners and the rest of the world what the UK is about, what our cultural values are, what it is that we bring to the global debate in whatever aspect it was. So if you like, our soft diplomacy, our soft power. And there we would talk about things like humanitarian efforts we made. The UK is the only country in the world, or developed economy, that spends 2% of its GDP on defence as a NATO member, but also 0.7% on development assistance, the UN goals. So UK committed 2.3 billion to humanitarian responses to hashtag Syria and the region, including food, water and sanitation, hashtag Global Britain. And it's those kinds of messages that we're key to get out, that we remain a permanent member of the Security Council, that we're in the G7, that we remain in the G20, that we're a NATO member, and we're a leading member of the Commonwealth that encompasses 3 billion people, 60% of whom are under the age of 30. And social media is really the only means to give us that kind of coverage, and we'll keep doing it. And the final point before we move on, Terry, I would say is that the benefit of social media is you can broadcast, but you can receive. And what we need to do as government is be receptive to what people are thinking about Brexit, which is a huge decision for all of us. So we need that feedback, and we're using social media to have that dialogue, and it's been hugely effective.
So Dave, I think I'm gathering from you that one of the reasons for using social media, obviously, is because there's a certain target audience that it's easier to reach through social. Do you or does your government have a sense of how social media worked as a tool when getting all this information out? Did it replace traditional media? Did it work better for certain messages, or did it work better overall? Do we know?
So it did a bit of each. For those of you who followed Brexit, what happened very soon, the morning after, was the Prime Minister resigned. So we had uncertainty around what the decision itself meant of the UK's relationship with the EU. We also had political uncertainty because we had no Prime Minister, and therefore there was a lot of flux politically. What social media enabled us to do was to fill in the blanks for people very quickly, to repeat messages that were coming out from our Chancellor of the Exchequer, the head of the Treasury, from our central bank, from business, to say, actually, the UK is still here, we're still doing X and Y, we're still continuing to contribute as we always do, we're still very much at the heart of trying to resolve the Middle East crisis, we're still very much at the heart of promoting free trade. We still produced 2 of the top 4 grossing films last year, 5 of the top 10 selling musical artists. This is one part of our relationship, but the rest of our relationship with the world, with our European partners, continues as it was. So social media was absolutely essential in filling that gap where we had a vacuum and uncertainty elsewhere, which we knew would be filled in good time, but we were able to keep that continuity going and keep that reassurance going, and social media was an absolutely essential part of that.
And really quickly, you mentioned a hashtag that wasn't Brexit. Did you redefine the conversation using the hashtag, or did you use it in combination with Brexit?
So we very quickly decided that we needed a campaign. And hashtag Global Britain is the campaign. For those of you who follow the UK, we also have another campaign which is called Great. And if you do hashtag Great Britain, you'll see that that really encompasses a lot of what the cultural values are and what our innovation and commercial values are. And hashtag Global Britain was very much an effort designed for social media to reassure people about the value that we bring to the global society as a whole and how that will continue.
Very interesting. Jose Antonio, let's talk a little bit. Your consulate, your government certainly uses social media for crisis management, for emergency management, for disasters. Can you tell us a little bit about how you use it or how you plan to use it?
Thank you, sure. Since this is my first public appearance since last Sunday when we had this 15th anniversary of 9/11, I would like to express the Mexican people's solidarity to the U.S. for those terrible attacks, in which, in fact, some Mexicans unfortunately died. But to get to your question, and please, if we could get the second slide that I brought on the screen, because when we do social media in the Mexican government, from the consulate standpoint, we need to be aware that we are part of a larger network. That what we are doing is being part of the Mexican government's social media outreach. So, first of all, at the top, let's say, is the President's office, which has a global overview of all the Mexican government's actions. Then, as Susan was mentioning in the case of Canada, we as well feel the responsibility from the Foreign Ministry to be the ones that translate those government's actions, even domestic actions, into the international arena and to put them into the world perspective. And finally, we have our diplomatic and consular network. We have 80 embassies in the world, 67 consulates. In fact, 50 of those 67 consulates are here in the United States. So there's no country that has as many consulates in another country as Mexico in the U.S. And I can also probably be sure to say that the U.S. has the most consulates that it has abroad in Mexico. So we have a very extensive consular relationship between Mexico and the U.S. And all those 50 consulates, what we do is give a local perspective to all those policies and all those broad communications that started from the top of the government. And then we have a fourth tier, which is Mexican communities that are themselves organized with our areas of representation in the world. And we also rely on them to convey our messages. If we get to the next slide, we can see some examples of that. You have a tweet from President Peña Nieto on a very broad issue of world political significance, which is the 2030 UN agenda. Then you have a foreign ministry tweet relating to the impact of Mexico on jobs in the United States. In fact, 6 million jobs in the U.S. directly depend on trade with Mexico. And then on the orange part, this is a tweet by the consulate to try to prevent sexual trafficking and human trafficking in our area of coverage. And the other one is just a matter of just some illustration of how we promote tourism. So that gives you an idea that we do not work on social media in a vacuum. We are part of a broader aspect. And we especially have a concern on emergency preparedness. And then, just as we connect with our government, if we can have the two from there, two more slides, a fourth one, that one. in those, for emergency preparedness, we not only connect back home to Mexican government, but we connect to local authorities, which are the ones that are mainly responsible for prevention in case of a disaster, of atmospheric conditions like a hurricane or flooding or whatever. So we have in that slide 2 examples, one tweet from the consulate telling our community to be prepared when we see a storm approaching. And the other one is just a caption from a video we hung up on YouTube to ask the population in southern Florida to be prepared for then Tropical Storm Erica, which last year finally didn't strike on Florida soil. But those are very specific examples of how we work the social media with our government, with our communities, and as part of a broader network.
What about physically on the ground? Is your social media handled from your office? Is it handled from maybe Mexico City, or is it a combination?
Both. If the communication message is started in Mexico, then the handle and the hashtags and everything are defined in Mexico. But we have some leeway when we have local issues to decide which hashtags and which handlebars to use.
Understood. Candido, you also use, the Spanish consulate also uses social media for issues of emergency preparedness. We recently had Zika. I know you had to deal with that. Can you tell us a little bit about your approach?
Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting all of us here to the Wynwood area, which is probably one of the most artistic areas here in Miami. Emergency, we all have to be prepared. And there are, I think, 3 principles that have been stated already: effectiveness, efficiency, and also public approach. Efficiency, we have the social media, which gives us a great opportunity to go very quick in a very personal, where you can personalize the message and also unify it. We have around 43,000 Spaniards registered in our consulate. So by emails, by Facebook, by Twitter, it's very easy to get at least the first information. On emergencies, now we're going to basics and following what José Antonio said. It is very important to have a clear message from the beginning. Now, in our preparation, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, since almost a decade, has been working, as other ministries of foreign affairs, very closely to expand information and to get to the citizen and give a very personal and very close, very quick response to the citizens. That's a part of public service in the 21st century. Mainly by Twitter, you give the first signal. If there's an emergency, if there's a hurricane, or there's an earthquake, that's the best impact you can get. But then you have to refine the message. And you can refine it by many ways. One says that the best, some experts say, that the best way to prepare for emergencies is by preparation. And in that way we have our own emergency room, which is 24/7 working, not always active, but always prepared to react. There's coordination between the consulate and the emergency room, and thank God, coordination with other consuls, and also coordination with local authorities, which is extremely important. If you take, for instance, in the United States, the Center for Hurricanes give us a precise, probably not 100% accurate, but a precise a way of how things are going to evolve. And as my daughter always reminds me, it's the new technologies, perhaps. So you have to use the new technologies. By following that way of the hurricane, you can prepare people, you can announce them. Obviously, the consulate is not able to welcome at the consular offices the 43,000, but at least you can give first the information and then give the information for the people to get ready as well. So with Zika, for instance, it's a different issue because is, although there's lots of information, but it's more in the way of how to prepare to avoid any mosquito bites, to avoid hours of day where you can be less exposed, and of course, long trousers, long sleeves, and insect repellent. In a way, as we see in Spain through the social media, you get closer to the citizens, you give them more information at a very, very short time, and you get ready for the future. It will evolve, certainly, and we have to work still more in all the social media that we have. But I think through coordination and also through the preparation with the traditional media that help us also very much in what we work and what we embark upon, I think it's very important. So that's more or less how we work.
I agree. I think there was a lot of talk some while back about this medium is replacing TV, which replaced the newspaper. The reality is, I don't see anybody going away. I see people evolving, different media evolving, but they're all very much there. And I think, for example, us as conference organizers, we need every medium. And I think you're saying that you, in trying to reach citizens and getting the message out, you need every medium as well, correct?
Every tool is necessary. You have also to think about the elderly. The elderly, they are not so familiarized with social media. Some are, fortunately, others are not. That's why it's difficult, even for some, even email, it's it's not a common, they get more and more used to it, but it's not that common. So you have to, with the coordination amongst us, amongst local authorities, and then amongst the traditional and social media, I think the mix is what makes the difference.
Now, let me ask you this question about how things are working behind the scenes. You said you may use something like Twitter to get the general message out because your consular offices couldn't handle everybody, if they were to walk through the door. Have these new technologies led to a change of staff? Has your staff grown, shrunk, or somehow changed because now you have these tools?
Well, in our case, the registrations of Spaniards have increased 20% since the 1st of January 2015, whereas our personnel, our staff, has not grown. It's the same. So we are adapting. I think it's a question to give a very personal, direct, and efficient service, and that's what we try to do.
And Mina, we want to hear from you. So we talked with the consul from Mexico and Spain about Zika and hurricanes. Talk to us about bigger issues. Maybe it's driving policy through social media. How does the Netherlands use it for things like sea level rise, climate change?
I would be glad to. So now my name is Willemijn Kallenberg, and I'm the Deputy Consul General of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, here located in Miami. And we more or less cover all the southern states of the US. I would like to talk to you today about water and diplomacy. And talking a little bit about the Netherlands, I'm here accompanied by some great neighboring countries of the US, Mexico, Canada. But maybe not all of you know that the economic and historic ties between the Netherlands and the US go ages back. What used to be called New Amsterdam is now known as New York. So going back to the water, you may not see it, but I was actually born and raised below sea level. I was born in a small village close to the coast, amongst the tulip fields, and
Has risen.
I've risen, I've grown. For me, I would never be surprised going on my bike and seeing that the nearest lake or river would be higher than I was on my bike. So when I arrived in Miami 1 year ago, I was actually quite surprised to see that water, sea level rise was not a topic of discussion in Miami at least, and in some parts of the rest of Florida. And I could hardly believe that all the people that came to Miami, that built up Miami, flooding situations of instability, unsafety, that they came here to build a better future for themselves and seemed not to care for the future of their children and grandchildren. So the British Consul General here previously has stated that when they used to have floodings in the UK, which they've had several times, that you would just call the Dutch, right? So with regards to sea level rise, I think the question is, should you or should you not call the Dutch? I think you should. Our whole infrastructure is built below sea level. We even have a metro system underground. And we do not only work in the Netherlands building dams and dikes, we've done a lot more. We work worldwide. We also work here in the region, in our own other countries, part of the kingdom, Curacao, Aruba, St. Martin. And we work in Australia, Colombia, Indonesia, everywhere. Our solutions are not just engineering solutions, but we have an inclusive approach of working together with architects, designers, urban planners, economists, ecologists, even artists. So our solutions for urban planning in the end are financially sound, environmental sustainable, and even pretty to look at. So some are even became tourist attractions. We use, in the consulate here in Miami, social media to raise water awareness. Because we believe it's important that for such a delicate, difficult subject, such as sea level rise, you really should engage in a dialogue, in a discussion amongst each other. So our traditional diplomacy is directed towards talking to governments, policymakers, etc. But there needs more to be done. Water awareness is very important. In the Netherlands, we've even appointed an envoy. He's a special envoy for international water affairs. He has worked a lot in New York. He was the senior advisor of the task force installed by Obama, the Hurricane Sandy task force. And he travels the world to talk about water. Because did you know that 90% of disasters are water related? And that apparently 15% of your income is being eaten away by water? It really is incredible. So we need to engage more in the topic of water. In the Netherlands, we truly live with water. When we rebuild, we think of how to do that. But we also think of the water. We build floating boats, floating houses, offices, etc. So I would like you to engage in the water discussion on social media, to think about your future, be prepared for your future, and not only prepared to repair. And, ultimately, you might end up calling the Dutch. So that's
And you know where to
what I
reach
wanted to
them
say.
because we've given you their handle. Let me ask you a question. So your consulate is putting that information out now. It's a current, ongoing conversation on your
Yes, it's
social.
in our public diplomacy policy. Water is a very important part. You know, in U.S. policy, water is not really an issue because, you know, most of the land is above sea level, which I understand. But, you know, predictions say that by the end of this century, sea level will have risen maybe up to 4 feet. So the whole of Miami Beach could be underwater.
And it is important, but I want to ask you a question about social media. Mina is new. You've been here, what, a year now, if that long?
Yes, 1 year.
So maybe like 2 to 3 years ago, I don't know how many of you are local and could remember, there was a lot of conversation and a lot of media coverage about how in a few years the whole downtown area was going to be underwater. So we were talking about it, but then we stopped. Do you find that one of the utilities of social media is that it allows you to continue a discussion and a conversation beyond maybe the 15 minutes that the media, the traditional media, was willing to dedicate to you?
Oh, I hope so, and I truly believe so. In just a year that I'm here in Miami, I've seen more debates arising. Even several mayors here in South Florida have installed special committees to talk about the challenges and solutions. So something is moving, and that is great. And I think it's my role as a Dutch guest here in the U.S. to
make sure that the conversation
enter in that dialogue and to keep it rolling. And we even invited several mayors to come to the Netherlands and check out the things we do.
So you're talking about something that's crucial in social media, which is engagement. And I'm going to open it up to questions. Babajide, I need you on deck. I'm going to open it up to questions in a minute, but I want to ask Susan. Susan, you talked about the Syrian crisis. Other than getting the message out, how do you handle the engagement part? How do you handle the not just pushing information, but...
I think that's a very important part, and there is a lot of discussion because, as I think almost everybody said, what we're looking at is social media complementing other forms of communication with our various audiences. And certainly, I know the Prime Minister puts a lot of emphasis on personal contact. One of the images that for us was iconic was him personally at the airport welcoming some of the Syrian refugees, and I think that person-to-person contact was important. Similarly, while you can push the message out and you can receive it, 140 characters, if you're using Twitter, doesn't give you a lot of room for the nuances. And in a sensitive subject like that, you need those. So I think it's very clear that social media complements things like smaller consultation groups, question and answer sessions, and that's something that this government has also emphasized, is the need to get out and consult, engage, but to complement that, which can only by definition be done in smaller groups in person, with a media that can reach so many more, so much more quickly.
Now, I imagine that this may be different from consulate to consulate, but is there certain levels that you have to clear before you can speak back, or how much leeway is allowed to the community managers to just engage?
Again, that's an important point for us because we are aware that it's not just my personal opinion. When I speak, I'm speaking on behalf of the government, so there's a responsibility there, and I think that depends on the government of the day. Certainly now, on many of these issues, we're being encouraged to certainly do our homework, know our files, but then when we speak on them, to get out and speak. And there's been a sense that what's most important is to get out and communicate. And, you know, they hire us assuming we're going to be reasonably responsible, but in those cases, get out and communicate. And if you have to correct something, you do that. But yes, it's always that balance between the responsibility of the government and the need for transparency.
but definitely being responsive. Do we have any questions? Do we have any questions from the audience? Do you want to? No, I'll go.
Hi, I'm Celeste I'm from Puerto Rico. And I'm going to ask you, I have actually two questions. The first one is if you use any other platforms to complement your Twitter efforts. And then the second one along those lines of engagement is if you receive many requests or questions through Twitter of travelers or, people from your countries.
Well, I can start. Certainly, Twitter, we get some questions, but I think people tend to push out through Twitter from what I can see. But we use a range of media, and certainly if you use Facebook or if you use LinkedIn, you certainly are looking for interaction, and I think those kind of media gives you those possibilities. So for us, we try to adapt our message and the use of the media to the nature of the media.
Yeah, and I think we do the same. I mean, we use all sorts of social media platforms, and it's interesting to see the way the nature of communication is changing. So Twitter's the extreme example because you're limited to 140 characters, but if we want to get into a bit more detail, we'll use Facebook because you can give much more pictorial evidence and much more evidence in that way through Facebook and have a better engagement there. But the other thing that we're noticing is that the nature of social media is becoming much more ephemeral. So you're now, my kids are moving on to apps where there's no records. You comment and then it's gone. And so being good public servants, we're very risk averse. So we know that whatever we say can be picked up and played back to us regularly. But actually, there's a question mark for us as government. Should we be communicating in a different way, in a much more ephemeral, much more rapid way, which entails a much higher risk? Now, when it comes to big questions like Syria, well, perhaps you don't want to be risking government policy on that. When it comes to interaction and how we get our message across on sort of other aspects that are important to us, then perhaps it is better to do it in a much more reactive and ephemeral way. So we're still learning how we do it, to be honest, and we're never going to be as agile and flexible as my 18-year-old on his smartphone. But we are slowly getting to grips with how we do this better. Diplomacy is communication, so.
We do get requests and communications from our community through social media, but we don't have the manpower to go beyond Facebook mainly. The other day I was reading that Facebook has just skyrocketed in the number of people using it, whilst Twitter has declined a little bit. But that's a paradox, because my perception is that politicians and the political world, you rely much more on Twitter than on Facebook. But the society is going the other way around. But so we don't have the manpower to work beyond Facebook, Twitter, and sometimes YouTube. But the marvel of this world of social media is that a single tweet with less than 140 characters immediately becomes a message in Facebook, in Snapchat, in LinkedIn, in you name it. So that's a wonder of this, and that's a marvel of this new universe that we're initially working on.
We do get quite a few requests, either by email or by Facebook, that we try to answer in less than 24 hours. Now, this sense of diplomacy 2.0 or instant diplomacy, you have to get ready to give at least a quick answer and then to redirect that answer to either the website or give them information, specifically in consular affairs, where people want really tangible things to be solved almost instantly. And what I can tell you also, which surprised me, is if by any chance there's someone that has not been answered in 24 hours, in 48 or 36 hours, they will write to you again asking for a quick reply. So that's, for us, at least for our consulate, it's nice, but at least it's also stressful to try to answer and keep the standards.
Just simple add. Yeah, I think social media and diplomacy are not that different because diplomacy is about networking, reaching out to people, connecting, and social media is more or less about the same. But now that there is social media, we do see an increase in workload because apart from the traditional diplomacy, we have like the digital diplomacy. So, for instance, we receive tweets from pregnant Dutch women asking us if they can travel to Wynwood. So usually we would not receive a tweet, and now we do. So you have the office space, but you also have this digital world, which gives it an extra dimension. But in the end, it's people connecting with people.
You just gave me an idea. You said that social media was not unlike diplomacy, and I'm thinking the next panel is going to be about how to use common sense, how to be diplomatic, how to use social media. Because I'm thinking you guys are probably the experts of how to use social media well by your very nature of being concerned with the way your message can come across, the image you're projecting. So that's our next one for next year.
Terry, just on that point, there's a serious point there, which is in the environment we live today, and it's not just social media, it's the press, it's the broader media, headlines are what form opinion. And as diplomats, we've got to look at the policy behind the headlines. So we can't always communicate in 140 characters. And you'll see it in political debate in whatever country you come from. I mean, certainly ours, I know, that it's really about the soundbite. And so we have to put a bit of substance behind the soundbite. So common sense, truth, trust are the real watchwords for us when we're doing this. And it's tough to keep that balance.
We have something here to plan. I'm curious, how many of you are using the live streaming features, whether it's Periscope or Facebook Live? You are? What do you use it for?
Now, right now.
What do you use it for?
Whenever I have an intervention, when there is a speech in public, we do it on Periscope immediately.
Do you ever use it just to have a conversation with whoever may want to hear from you?
No. It's just a matter of putting on the social media at the event and getting a live feed. That's it.
One of the things that I hear from authorities, which is maybe true of you, and Dave goes back to what you're saying about sound bites, is that one of the blessings of social media is that you get to tell your part of the story. You're no longer worried that traditional media is necessarily going to misquote you, and if they do, you have the ability to communicate what you actually said, not what somebody said you said. Is that correct?
Definitely.
Any other questions?
It doesn't work? Hello, my name is Jonathan. I have a quick question. I'm the marketing specialist for a trade and logistics company over in Doral. And one thing that I'm struggling with right now is using Twitter and social media to convey our message of logistics and global trade. One thing that I've done before taking on this endeavor is looking at our competitors and what they do and how they use social media and Twitter to see how they use it. And we really don't see much interaction on it because the news are kind of boring, and logistics and trade, it's not a very fun industry. So what would you recommend perhaps from your perspective on communicating news, or what are some sort of headlines or something that may appeal to people or that may get the ball rolling on communication so that I could break, I guess, the glass ceiling for logistics and global trade and communicating in social media?
First, I'd just like to savor this moment that someone from a company, from the private sector, is asking representatives of the government how to make a more effective, sexier message. Thank you. You just made my day.
Told you we were on the right track.
I would say, from our point of view, it's what makes anything good. Often pictures, whenever we can with a tweet, a picture says so much, and that's the way to expand your 140 characters. Second, I think if you can have something witty or something funny or something that sparkles a little bit, that's the kind of thing that that catches on. And one thing that I've heard from people who've been using social media for a long time is you often don't know what's going to attract people's attention. You know, whether it's the latest cat story or you know, Canadian geese using a crosswalk or whatever it is, you don't know, and it can be surprising. So there is that element of fun to these too, which again, probably is not the main business we're in, but it certainly helps with the message. So those are three of the things that I see that helps get a message to catch on and get out.
Well, how to make public service sexy? Well, public service and diplomacy. Diplomacy includes, during the 19th century and before, you need secrecy, discretion, efficient also. Now, in the 21st century, it seems that you have to go beyond, you have to communicate more what you do. Now, we have, at least in our service, in the Spanish Foreign Service, we have to strike the balance between accuracy, attractiveness, but also accountability and responsibility. Now, it's a terrible mix. It's not like a product that we need to sell. We need just to sell a country, an efficient public service, and also, when we are posted abroad and with our embassies and consulates, to be well coordinated and to help to build bridges between our country and the country that receives us. Now, in that system, and especially in the consulates, we also have to make it attractive to our own residents, not just to the country itself, but in the consulates, I need to take care of the 43,000 Spaniards that we have. And in that we work every day. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail.
Can I just, very quickly, there is a political science rule here in the US. All politics is local. All communications is local. So you need to think what kind of issues your audience in the US would find interesting that connects with them in their daily lives for them to find it relevant. And I would recommend you to check out, all of you, a Twitter account at AMXPAC. What they do, at AMXPAC, what they do is get trade figures between Mexico and states, localities, and national relationships between Mexico and the US to tell people that Mexico is a relevant partner and a relevant neighbor. And I think that they do achieve it. So give it a try. I do recommend as an example of what you want to achieve.
That's fantastic. And I will direct, he said at AMXEAZ. Go ahead.
PAC. Amex PAC.
Okay. There's another account, the Maersk, you know, the shipping line. Go to their Instagram account. They have a bunch of them, and they're fantastic. And who would think that you could do much with shipping containers? So really quick, we have a few more minutes. One last question. I started out by giving out your official Twitter handles and your personal one. How do you handle communications through your official consulate offices versus what you put out through your personal accounts?
Well, ¿puedes poner la última? Okay. This is going to end with a personal commercial. What I do is that if I am, like here, that I am the Consul General of Mexico in Miami, and if I tweet something, then the official account from the consulate takes it and retweets it. And the other way around. If it's an official communication and the official account tweets it, I do tweet it on my personal account. The only thing is, you have to be very careful that they don't retweet what you do on a personal basis. And so it's usually soccer games and opinions on movies and that sort of thing. It's quite easy. But I do like to keep my independence in my Twitter account and on my Facebook account, and to always make it clear that it is personal. On my header in my accounts, I do not tell that I am the Consul General of Mexico. I just say that I am a Mexican diplomat, and I also make specific that retweets are not necessarily endorsements. It means that I find things relevant, even I may be against them, but I think that they are relevant for the debate, and that's what I use. And the personal commercial, as you find in the slide, I need 57 more followers to get my first 1,000. So please follow.
We can help you with that. Can we help? As a matter of fact, I want all of you to follow him and then tell your friends to follow him. By the end of the day, come on, guys, don't make us look bad. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much to all of you for being with us. It was a pleasure.